Jodie, some big economic news this week. The Reserve Bank has cut interest rates. It dropped the cash rate by 25 basis points, or as I like to say, by 0.25%. That's down to 3.6%. No surprises there. It seems that everyone saw that coming. But what was interesting was the tone from the Reserve Bank Governor, Michelle Bullock.
Yeah, she wasn't exactly popping champagne bottles. The Reserve Bank also cut its growth forecasts, saying that households and businesses are pulling back on spending. And they cut their projection for productivity growth from 1% to just 0.7% annually. Bullock said that the bank is obviously not in charge of fixing productivity, but it is the elephant in the room when it comes to doing their job. It makes their job harder.
Yeah, it's definitely one of those factors that does influence the Reserve Bank and right through into economic policy, which brings us to next week's big event, the Treasurer's Economic Reform Roundtable. That kicks off on Tuesday. Treasurer Jim Chalmers is bringing together some really key stakeholders and tackling the productivity puzzle. That's been the really big talking point about what this roundtable will focus on. So let's just pause there for a second and get around that productivity question. Productivity grew just 0.1% in the 23-24 financial year, and the Reserve Bank, as you said, expects it to reach 0.7% going forward. That's well below the long-term average of 1.5% to 2% that we really need to see.
Yeah, so think of it this way. Imagine that you're a baker and you're making 100 loaves of bread a day. Years later, you're still making 100 loaves of bread a day, same effort, same hours. Increased productivity is getting more efficient at that and making 102 loaves and then 104 loaves, so enough to justify a real pay rise. But you didn't get more efficient, so unfortunately you're still stuck at 100 loaves. So your boss has to raise bread prices just to cover the rising costs of everything else, but there's no extra money for your wages to keep up. So that's sort of a micro example of what's happening across Australia.
Yeah, and that's exactly why Chalmers is calling this roundtable this week. It's sort of straight out of the Bob Hawke playbook. Back in 1983, Bob Hawke won an election. He brought business and the unions together and talked about some really tough issues while they had a really fresh new mandate. As for who is going to this one this year, the idea is to get everyone around a table.
Yeah, not everyone's invited though. I've heard a few people this week sounding a bit put out that they didn't get a bait. In this case, it's the cabinet table in Parliament House that they're around, and there's 8 people from the business sector. Probably the best known is Matt Common from CommBank. There's 4 from the unions, 5 regulators and government officials, 4 people representing the civil groups, so environment, housing, those areas. And other than the Treasurer and the PM, there's 3 politicians.
Yeah, so Chalmers' coalition counterpart Ted O'Brien is there, along with independent Allegra Spender and the New South Wales Treasurer Daniel Mookie. He gets a seat because he's sort of president of the group of treasurers around the country, so that's why he's doing that. The idea is that they're going to try and build consensus for getting on with some tough reforms, but from what's been said already, and we mentioned this a couple of weeks ago, it seems like a lot of the tough reforms are off the table.
Yeah, raising the GST, implementing wealth taxes, removing negative gearing, reducing capital gains tax discounts, carbon taxes, none of those will be considered here. And you might ask how those things would improve productivity anyway. The answer is directly, maybe they wouldn't.
Yeah, there's sort of a round circle to get to how it influences productivity, some of those tax reforms, but they definitely fit into that economic reform bucket more broadly. It's about having the best tax settings in place so that the rest of the economy can get on with things in the most efficient way. What's under consideration are faster housing approvals for projects there. Of course, housing and the stock of housing and affordability of housing has been such a big talking point really since the start of COVID. It's something that's really come up and it's been a big building point in this meeting.
Yeah, I thought it was interesting how they've carved up the agenda for this. Day 1, resilience. Day 2, productivity. Day 3, budget sustainability and tax reform. So there's a fair bit to cover. Not a lot of time for small talk, I wouldn't think.
A lot to cover. These are very busy people too. I kept thinking, how are they taking 3 days out of their schedule to do this? But they are big, important conversations. How Australians work is a really big part of that equation as well. AI is looming. Hybrid work or work from home arrangements keep coming up. The peak union body is going to that roundtable with a proposal to move forward with a 4-day week, where appropriate, they say. But the boss of one of our big banks this week pushed in the other direction.
Totally in the opposite direction. That's Westpac's new CEO, Anthony Miller. Front page of the Financial Review on Monday was a story about how he's telling staff that he works every single day, including Christmas Day, and he's scheduling weekend meetings with other executives, demanding shorter meetings as well to be more efficient. It's not just Westpac either. ANZ's new boss, Nuno Matos, has brought in the consultants. He's limited presentations to 5 slides, which I think is a great idea just for everybody, and sent a pretty frank email to staff saying there are things that need to change.
Yeah, I think if you've worked in corporate land or a big organisation, you know the presentation decks can get quite long. Death by PowerPoint.
Totally.
And look, the context here for those couple of banks, for Westpac and for ANZ, it's quite important to understand. Those banks employ 130,000 people around the country. They lag well behind CommBank, which really is the market leader. Westpac's already made 790 staff redundant in the last couple of months. They're asking people to come into the office a lot more as well. ANZ, new CEO there too, talking about being sharper and leaner and bringing productivity into line with industry standards. They said they've got a bit to make up there.
Yeah, right. Meanwhile, CBA reported a record full-year profit of $10.25 billion this week. That's massive. Not as massive as investors were hoping, though, so its share price fell. But they are saying that competition is really stiff in the banking world. You'd have to think financial services and banking is a sector that's absolutely ripe for AI disruption.
Yeah, for sure. But on the productivity front, at least we know some CEOs are working on Christmas Day, so I'm sure that's really going to boost things for them.
They get paid enough too, don't they?
True. So that's the sort of really winding road, I guess, through the news of the week and what's coming up next week. The economy is very much in focus, so we hope that's given you a bit of a head start.